how did America's industrial economy decline? Because it certainly has. Those jobs have been gone for a long time, and those buildings, many of which were abandoned or razed, now are finally being considered worth reusing. And what really caused that decline in the United States?
Okay. So how many hours do we have?
That's right.
Look, so yeah, I did a few number checks before this. So if you go back to 1970, about a quarter of American workers were in manufacturing. And if that were still true, we would have 40 million manufacturing workers today. We actually have 13 million at this point. Mostly that's not because we stopped producing manufactured goods. We actually still produce quite a lot. We import a lot, but it's still, even if all of those imports vanished, we would still be nowhere close to that kind of manufacturing economy. Most of it is, so actually, let me, there's two ways to look at this stuff. There's an economist's way of looking at it, which is obviously what I'm going to do, and then there's a kind of a social observer's way of looking at it. And each perspective is missing. You know, the economist's view tends to be too cold and to miss the question of dignity, of place, of community. The social observers tends to miss do we actually need all those manufacturing jobs? Most of the jobs are gone because of technological change. We don't need as many people doing that kind of work as we used to. I believe Michael's first photograph there was the oldest, is of piers that have been torn down. So why are there no longer freight piers on the Hudson River? And the answer is not that we actually process less freight. It's because we don't do it the way we used to. There used to be back when Marlon Brando could have been a contender. There were 55,000 longshoremen in the New York area. There are now 4,000. And that's not because we've processed less freight. There's more stuff coming in than ever before, but it's all those, actually the best view I know is from the monorail at Newark Airport. Those massive, massive cranes lifting containers directly onto truck beds. And that's mostly where the manufacturing jobs went. Imports, trade contributed. And if you're an economist, you say, okay, the China shock, we think the surge of Chinese imports between 2000 and 2010 seems to have displaced about 1.5 million manufacturing jobs. And if you're an economist, you say, oh, well, 1.5 million. I mean, 1.5 million American workers are fired every month. So that's,
that's a crazy
that's not
number.
a big thing. But on the other hand, what we learned, and this is actually, is that rips the heart out of communities. These are not an evenly distributed loss. So I think the question is, the main reason we're not a manufacturing economy is that we can satisfy the demand for manufactured goods with a lot fewer workers. It's the same reason that we used to be a country where most people were farmers.
But what about the free trade agreement? I mean, I'm a New Yorker who grew up in Queens, so I have this vision, right, of bread being manufactured by Tasty. There was the Domino refinery and the Swing Line Staple Factory, some of you may remember, in Long Island City. And what about in the Bronx, which manufactured Farberware? Right? Didn't we all have Farberware because it came from the Bronx?
Actually,
those jobs didn't, disappear. They just disappeared from New York.
Well, to a certain extent, they disappeared because they're just done with many fewer people. I mean, automation,
okay.
robots, and also actually New York deindustrialized a lot before much of the rest of the country, with the jobs at first not moving overseas but moving to South Carolina.
Right.
And it's also true that New York these days it's a monoculture economy. Everything here basically feeds off Wall Street, and that drives up costs. And there's nothing necessarily There is something wrong with Wall Street, but anyway, but you know, and it creates lots of other jobs. So most of us in this city work in things that ultimately are supported by the money made on Wall Street, but people are doctors and shopkeepers and all of that. But the question always here is, change happens. We couldn't freeze the economy as it was in 1890 when 60% of the workforce was farmers. We couldn't freeze the economy the way it was in 1970 when a quarter were manufacturing workers. But do we have to lose as much of the heritage? Do we have to lose as much of the community and as much of the physical structures as we do? And there's been a lot of atrocities there. And that's the way to think about it. There was no way we were going to stay a mainly industrial economy. We are a post-industrial economy. That was fated. That's change happens. The question is, are we managing the change in a way that preserves at least some of what was good about the past?
Yeah, so I want to follow up on this, and then before we get to Michael, because I think this is really important, especially in the New York metropolitan area and the pictures that are captured in this book. There is this new industrial economy that's emerging in the United States. Some of it's here in New York. I mean, I've been to the Brooklyn Navy Yard and to some of those places where there's a form of manufacturing happening there. But I don't know if that's, boutique. Does that have anything to do with the broader trends of what we need in our economy? And what does this new industrial economy really look like? Are we going to reuse these old spaces in a functional way?
This is problematic. I mean, sometimes some old industrial spaces can be repurposed really well. It turns out that actually older ones, but 19th century mills can often be turned into great residential spaces. Because they have really high ceilings and really huge windows. And the reason they have those is because before electrification, you had a big steam engine in the basement that was running cranks and pulleys, and you had a bar overhead. And you had to have high ceilings to transmit the power, and you had to have big windows because there were no electric lights. And that fortuitously turns out to make great condos now. But there are other things too, and there are ways you can save it. On the other hand, a modern factory looks very different from an old factory. It's a lot more machines. A lot of old factories were kind of vertical because that's what the technology demanded, and modern factories are sprawling with wide aisles, and New York City is not the greatest place to have that kind of factory. So some of it can be saved or it can be repurposed, and that's what you try to do where you can. And you try to avoid crimes like the destruction of Penn Station.